In today's video, we're going to be talking about the upcoming hurricane season, which I think could be one of the worst, if not the worst, of all time. Obviously, that's very, very strong language, but we have a lot of factors leading us to believe that this hurricane season has the most favorable conditions possible, basically. So we're going to be going over that today. Now, before we get into things, I just want to clarify one thing, and that is this area here called the Main Development Region. We call that MDR for short. And this area is the most important region for a hurricane season because most hurricanes, tropical storms, tropical depressions, all of our tropical invests, most of them, I would say 80+% of them come from this area here. So it is the main development region for hurricanes. As you can see, they leave this red area and then they go elsewhere typically. So they can hit the Gulf, the East Coast, even out to sea, which happens oftentimes, or a lot of the time at least. They all usually originate from this MDR region. So it's very, very important to track the conditions for this area here. Another very important thing is the ENSO, which is your La Nina or El Nino. This year we're in a La Nina, as you can see here, where the trade winds head westward, not towards the Atlantic. So this leads towards less winds and less shear for the Atlantic Ocean. Usually this is very, very favorable for development because they don't have that wind holding them back. When these storms are in their very early stages of development, that shear can come in and break them up as they're trying to develop. But in a La Nina, we have a much more reduced amount of that shear, leading towards a very stagnant environment for these storms to just erupt and continue to develop. So this is a very strong statistic here. Typically in La Ninas, we see very active hurricane seasons, and in El Ninos, which we see on screen here, we typically see less active hurricane seasons, and that is a very strong statistic. As I mentioned, it's not one that's typically follows these guidelines. No, it is almost every time when we see an El Nino, we see less activity, and almost every time we see a La Nina, there's almost always more activity. So it definitely varies, but not very much. That's a very, very strong statistic that we use, and I'd say it's about 50% of the equation there. The other 50% is going to be your temperatures, your sea surface temperatures, which we see on screen here. This is the current sea surface temperatures, not the forecasted ones, because unlike our air temperatures that fluctuate and move really quickly around the globe, in those cases, it's, not really important to use current temperatures. It's more useful to use the forecasted and projected temperatures. The sea surface temperatures, however, don't fluctuate nearly as much. So our current sea surface temperatures give us a really, really good idea of what we may see in 3 or 4 months. We expect pretty minimal changes, only really warming, obviously, as we reach the summertime and fall time. Everywhere is going to kind of just warm up, obviously, with the climate. However, we do see very, very far above average temperatures throughout most of your Atlantic, or at least the notable portions of it. Up near the northeast of the United States and eastern Canada, as well as southern Greenland, we do have an area with some below average sea surface temperature anomalies. Obviously, that's not really an area that we watch for tropical development very often. Sometimes they'll see a storm roll through, as we saw last season, where it hit Atlantic Canada, obviously. I think it was 2 back-to-back storms, and I think they were both hurricanes. However, those storms don't usually develop nearby these areas. They usually develop in these areas like our main development region, and then move into there as an already very strong storm, and generally they weaken very slowly in this area regardless. However, tropical systems don't originate or develop in these areas typically. Now, for all the areas where hurricanes typically do develop, which is the Gulf, Caribbean, or MDR, as we mentioned earlier, these areas are boiling. Not literally, obviously, but they are very, very far above normal, on pace for historic levels of above average temperatures, and I believe they already are in historic territory as far as how warm things already are in these areas. We're more like where we would expect to be in May, June time frame with a lot of these temperatures. So we are looking at months ahead of schedule with how warm these things are, and we do expect it to just continue to warm, obviously. Now, the lighter red areas are above normal. The darker red is going to be even further above normal for the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and the MDR, which are the 3 most important areas. But our MDR here I have in purple because they're even further above normal. keep in mind, this is the #1 most important area for tropical development. And like I mentioned earlier, 80% of our storms approximately come from this area. So definitely, this is very impactful to see the warmest and most above normal temperatures in this area. This is going to hugely aid in development. Combine this with that La Nina that we have already begun to move into, and we're expecting to be in a full-blown La Nina for the summer and fall time, aka your Atlantic hurricane season. Those are two of basically the only factors that we really track here. Unlike wintertime, severe weather, any seasonal or monthly forecasts, I do all of those, right? You guys keep up with the channel, but the hurricane season is the #1 easiest season to predict because, again, La Nina and then sea surface temperatures is almost 100% of the equation here. When you see warmer temperatures in the Atlantic, you see that La Nina, so the reduced wind shear as we mentioned earlier. You combine those two things and it is almost definite that we're going to see an above average, more active hurricane season here. And I mean, I would say that we are on pace for likely a historic hurricane season, almost guaranteed in the top 5 most active seasons. And I would say, argumentatively, that it could rival the 2020 hurricane season, which, keep in mind, was also a La Nina. We were exiting an El Nino and heading into a La Nina, which is exactly the same as this year. But not only that, they also had the very, very warm Atlantic temperatures. We see that once again here. So conditions are similar, if not more favorable than that 2020 season because we're actually expecting to head into a stronger La Nina than that season. So things are looking a little bit more favorable than the worst hurricane season of all time. Not damage-wise, but named storm-wise, we had the most named storms in the Atlantic that season. So definitely that is going to jump off the screen at you as a very, very strong prediction. But keep in mind, this is, again, a very easy seasonal forecast compared to all of the others, and we feel strongly confident in this. And also, other forecasters and meteorologists would agree. From everything I'm seeing, everybody is calling for an extremely active hurricane season. Even a lot of others calling for potentially the most active of all time. So not really out of the realm of possibility and not even that crazy to say considering the conditions that we have. Obviously, our wind shear forecast is going to be below average because we have that La Nina, so keep in mind that that wind shear will be lessened than what is typical because of our La Nina, and that is really, really going to aid in the development. Again, the strong, very, very warm temperatures are going to help that development to take place, and then this shear is not going to be there to break it up. So that is 2 check marks there as far as things that really, really aid in development. And therefore, our development forecast is above average in the pink areas, and those darker pink, almost magenta areas, we're calling for highly, highly favorable development conditions. Again, rivaling almost all of the top hurricane seasons of all time. So I cannot state this enough. I mean, it is expected to be extremely active. Nothing is holding this hurricane season back on paper, looking at it again from a multi-month perspective. However, this is a pretty easy forecast, like I mentioned earlier. It's very, very much so unlike other seasonal forecasts where it is extremely difficult and there's a lot of room for error. These hurricane seasons are almost, you can almost look at 2 different pictures, the temperature anomalies and then the ENSO forecast, which again is that El Nino Southern Oscillation, so El Nino or La Nina. If you just show me 2 of those, I can tell you what likely is going to happen for the hurricane season. It is that simple. Now, the overall forecast here is going to look like this. Historic development is what I am predicting in the MDR or main development region. Very, very active, extremely favorable, potentially the most favorable of all time. Nothing is telling me that this won't be one of the most active hurricane seasons of all time. So this MDR area, expect historic development. More fish storms than normal for this area out to sea. Bermuda is in there, but it still gets considered a fish storm, which basically just means that, fish are going to be impacted by it, not people. It's kind of a running joke, but more fish storms than normal. And that's not because I expect more storms to head in this direction than most years. That's just because I expect more storms than normal. So everywhere is expecting to see more storms than what's typical, including this out to sea area. Hurricane highway for the Caribbean. Okay, so typically they move from this MDR area in the red into this Caribbean area in the pink, unless they move north of that MDR curving out to sea. So Hurricane Highway, expect a lot of systems moving through here. To the south, Hurricane Graveyard, this southern, very far southern Caribbean area, is historically known for destroying storms if they move in this area. It's actually very dry oftentimes in that area, and it's just not good for hurricane development, even in a very, very favorable year like this one that we are expecting. Extremely favorable in the Gulf of Mexico. Temperatures are very warm in this area. I expect homegrown systems, which basically, for those of you that don't know, means systems that originate in the Gulf of Mexico, which, again, 80% of them come from the MDR, but there is a lot that develop outside of there as well, including this Gulf of Mexico area, which historically puts out a lot of storms. So expect more of that activity than typical. The East Coast is going to be a wild card because even if we have, let's say, 30 storms like 2020 had, it does not guarantee that any of them are going to really curve into this area. It takes a very specific wind pattern, and even in some of the most active hurricane seasons, we've seen none in this area. And then in some of the quietest hurricane seasons, we've seen 1 or 2 hit this area. So even though we're expecting historic conditions and historic development, that does not guarantee that this area will be hit. So that's why they are a wild card. I will say, though, with the above average amount of storms, that does give us an above average chance of getting hit. It still is a wild card, however. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really enjoyed putting this one together. I'm looking forward to making more hurricane season forecasts ahead, and even, hurricane forecasts once they're here. So be sure to subscribe. We do upload every single day, and I do anticipate that this hurricane season is going to be a huge talking point for us for the entire year to come until it's all said and done. So be sure to subscribe for more content just like this. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.